One of the things we see in the moronic discourse is that Israel's a new country, while all the Arab countries are ancient countries. This is completely untrue. These ancient countries have actually existed for 18 months. They are invading a country that has literally only existed for 12 hours. The French and the British said, well, we totally agree with you about the empire thing, but we'll call them mandates instead. So mandate was just a new word for an imperial province until the people were ready to rule themselves. There are 500,000 Jews there, roughly, and they have nowhere to go. It's either survive or die.
Okay, so we're going to be reacting to an episode of Trigonometry, and with the guest Simon Sebag Montefiore, who's a British historian, best-selling author known for books on Russia, Stalin, Jerusalem, and world history. He's also almost certainly Jewish. His last name is Sebag, so he's probably a Hebrew. Just for content's sake, we're gonna get right into it.
Simon Sebag Montefiore, welcome to Trigonometry.
Lovely to be here, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you on. You have written this amazing book about the history, the recent history of the Middle East, the last 120 years or so. And it's rather timely given everything that's going on, but it's also history, which we love on the show. We really enjoyed reading it. It's great to have you on. And it's great to be able to look at this complex region in the level of detail, but also objectively, which is something that you do, which literally no one who now talks about the Middle East does.
I mean, that's the great challenge. I mean, one of the reasons I wrote the book is because this book didn't exist. And Benjamin Disraeli, who's one of my great heroes, always said, when I want to read a book and I can't find it, I write it myself. So that's sort of what I've done here. I mean, as you know, there is an industry now on the Middle East. I mean, the sort of publishing industry that's partly historical, partly sort of moral. It's almost a religious movement. And it's just sort of, obviously, it's virtually always partisan and is kind of following an ideological pathway that is like so narrow and so inaccurate. And so I wanted to avoid writing, obviously a book just following the sort of a neo-Marxist ideology of sort of decolonialization. But at the same time, I didn't want to write a Zionist book either. I didn't want to write Martin Gilbert's books again, wonderful as they were. I wanted to do something like you were touching on, something that was as balanced as I could make it for all sides and without ideology.
Well, you've definitely succeeded. So let's talk about it. You basically cover the 20th century and the recent 20 years as well, up to October 7th. And it's absolutely fascinating. I think we have to start with something that people now don't talk about, which is the role of Turkey, which was at that point the Ottoman Empire,
yes,
which controlled pretty much all of that region at the time. And it's collapse following World War I that leads to much of the chaos we see today.
Yeah, I mean, the Ottoman Empire is a fascinating institution. I mean, it goes on for 400 years or more. It's like all great empires, like the Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire. It has many kind of versions of itself during that period. It's not always the same institution. It's an Islamic empire. That's the point. It's a sultanate caliphate. And the later sultans really emphasized their roles as caliphs as well as sultans, which is, of course, very relevant today because the ideas of caliphates are often in the news. But the point about it was tolerant up to a point. And it's often stated, there's a huge cliche when people say, like, it was so tolerant that, the Middle East has been destroyed by America or by nationalism. And that's true up to a point. But actually, the myth of the great tolerance of the Ottoman Empire is something that you read about quite often in journalism, of course. And in fact, there was a period when, after Tanzimat, which was the series of reforms starting in 1839 and going up into the 1850s, when everyone was made citizens of the Ottoman Empire. And for about 20 or 30 years, there was a sort of period of quite extraordinary tolerance, but it ended pretty quickly because this opening up of the Ottoman Empire, which happened right after the Crimean War, led to a discombobulation of all the arrangements they'd made to rule it. And so the first thing that happened in the Middle East was this massacre of Christians in Damascus, known as the Damascus events in 1860. And it started in a war between the Christians and the Druze, which we made sects that are complicated, and we may get to talk about later if we have time. But we want to do a larger, more overarching trajectory. But that led to one of the first Western interventions in 1860 when the French and other powers sent an army there. But anyway, the point is, after that, Abdul Hamid, the Sultan, started to impose a sort of religious Ottomanism on the empire, and using various minorities like the Kurds to crush the Christians who were restive and gradually seeking independence. And that led to the Armenian massacres, the Bulgarian massacres, and Abdul Hamid was nicknamed the Bloody Sultan. So the Ottoman Empire was a little different from the cliche. And then one has to remember, too, that the Ottoman Empire, far from being tolerant, it ended with the rule of the three pashas in World War I. And the Ottoman Empire was on the side of Germany and the Central Powers and Austria. And the Ottoman Empire fought much more, in a much stronger way than the British or French or anyone expected, because it was known as the sick man of Europe. But it ended up under this regime of the three pashas, Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Jamal Pasha, who really brought in and imposed a sort of proto-fascism.
Had to stop for those mustaches, man. Those are some serious stashes, huh? The Turks and their stashes. Let me tell you, you could hide some paraphernalia in there.
A sort of racial eugenicist, Islamic Turkish supremacism, and that included the massacre of the Armenians, the killing of the Armenians, of over 1.1 million Armenians, and also forgotten genocides then too, that included the killing of the starving of Maronite Christians, and also the massacres of Greeks in what is now Turkey, and particularly the Pontic Greeks. Pontus means the Black Sea. So the Ottoman Empire in the end was something quite different from the way it had started. And in many ways, we're still seeing now the consequences of and the sort of chaos after the breakup of the Ottoman Empire.
Well, right. I mean, it's often said by people who may be ignorant, but I'm probably one of them, about the Middle East, that it seems from the outside superficial analysis that it's hard to have control of any of those portions unless you're really, really tough.
Yeah.
Unless you're willing to be quite brutal about it. And the Ottomans controlled that area for 400 years. It's therefore no surprise then that once their empire collapses,
Yeah.
It becomes as volatile as things have become.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
That's fair. And also the Ottomans, lost control of huge parts of their empire for large periods of time, as I explained in the book. At one time, an Egyptian ruler, Muhammad Ali the Great, almost conquered the Ottoman Empire and was only stopped by the British. And it was incredibly ruthless. And in fact, throughout its rule, there were kind of massacres of minorities. By the early 19th century, so the early 1800s, much of what is now the Levant, or, the period, the area that is now, Israel, Syria, Jordan, was incredibly impoverished and empty. I mean, Jerusalem, I wrote a book about Jerusalem. By the sort of 1780s, Jerusalem was pretty much empty. It was still run by a small group of Palestinian Arab families, like the Husseinis and the Nashashibis and others, who controlled the holy places there. But basically, it was half empty. There were about 2,000 people living in Jerusalem, so it was tiny. Because nowadays in our age of sort of CNN News, when it's sort of like Jerusalem, sacred to three faiths, one imagines that it's always been the center of the world. Well, it wasn't. It was very neglected for about 200 or 300 years. But you're right that, the idea was that you had to be pretty tough to control the Middle East, and the Ottomans were absolutely ruthless. During World War I, apart from slaughtering the Armenians, they had to deal with a bigger problem, and the big problem was Arab nationalism. In the beginning of the beginning of the century, the 20th century, there were three big imperial powers dominating the Middle East. So you have the Ottomans from Constantinople, who were Turks. Everyone spoke Turkish, by the way. If you wanted to get on, you had to speak Turkish. It's interesting that in the dynasty that ruled Egypt, only the last king, Farouk, spoke Arabic. All the rest of them just spoke Turkish and didn't speak any Arabic. Everything was done through Turkish. Everything was done in Constantinople, and basically that they were absolutely ruthless about any.
This is a big learning lesson from this. Meaning this is very interesting stuff. I'm very interested. I am very excited to continue to watch this. He's a library of knowledge, Simon Sebag Montefiore. So when I think about the Ottoman Empire being ruthless, and then I think about the fact that the majority of people during their reign spoke Turkish, and then people like to call Israelis and Jews colonizers and expansionists, yet outside of Jews speaking Hebrew, very few people speak Hebrew on planet Earth versus people speaking English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic. This is proof of conquest. The languages that are most widely spoken hold the most amount of land and or have the most significant populations. It's very, very clear. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Follow me at Rafi the Realtor on the gram for all of your real estate needs in South Florida, and you can support the channel by going to the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pinned comment or description. Until next time, peace.